Hello. Hello, and welcome. Gosh and darn, it's warm. Whew. Hello. Hello KB, hello Chrono, hello Fishy, hello Hiram, and indeed, hello Molly Bonham. If anybody sees my brain, I think it dribbled out of my ears about 3 hours ago. It wasn't, Kate B. We're now into a new heat wave. UK's looking apparently at 10 days. That'll be fun. So yeah, it has gone up quite a lot in the last 24 hours. Actually, in the last 16 hours. Yep, we're on the new heat wave. We've had the old heat wave. This is a new one. Experience the hot new wave. Thanks. I was just checking my camera wasn't on. Molly! Hey! Well, Fish, the reason I was late streaming, I had one of those, I have food in the flat, I want none of it. So I had to do an emergency shop. Because otherwise I just was not going to bother eating today. Oh, okay. I apologise for that, Molly. I don't know why it got stuck, but okay. Your heatwave and storms have cleared and there's 2 to 3 days before the next moves in, Kate. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. It sounded pretty hellish. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sorry. Right. We are doing some more Carnacki. I bought the entire book. I'm bloody using some of it. So, this is The Haunted Jarvee. Oh, I'm glad Ruthie managed fireworks not too badly. Mind you, I'm not convinced if storms had been happening, it would have put some people off. It rarely seems to here. Bonfire night. They can be chucking it down and they will still go for it. Mm-hmm. Oh, honestly, Molly. Are you actually the only competent person there? Hey, Alia. Seriously. Submitted Thursday. Instructions today. Good grief. I think all the brain cells migrate to Molia when anyone joins this company. Okay. So, yes, we are now having experienced a couple of Carnackis, one of which was a ghost of a hand, one of which was him investigating an impossible book. And now, it's something a little bit different. I maintain he makes things worse, but I shall leave it to you to decide. It's probably going to be a two-parter. I did have a quick look through. So, The Haunted Jarvee by William Hope Hodgson. Seen anything of Carnacki lately? I asked Arkwright when we met in the city. No, he replied. He's probably off on one of his jaunts. We'll be having a card one of these days, inviting us to number 472 Chain Walk, and then we'll hear all about it. Queer chap, that. He nodded and went on his way. It was some months now since we four, Jessup, Arkwright, Taylor and myself, had received the usual summons to drop in at number 472 and hear Carnacki's story of his latest case. What talks they were! Stories of all kinds, and true in every word, yet full of weird and extraordinary incidents that held one silent and awed until he'd finished. Strangely enough, the following morning brought me a curtly worded card telling me to be at number 472 at 7 o'clock promptly. I was the first to arrive. Jessup and Taylor soon followed, and just before dinner was announced that Arkwright came in. Dinner over, Carnacki, as usual, passed round his smokes, snuggled himself down luxuriously in his favourite armchair, and went straight to the story we knew he had invited us to hear. "I've been on a trip in one of the real old-time sailing ships," he said, without any preliminary remarks. "The Jarvee, owned by my old friend Captain Thompson. I went on the voyage primarily for my health, but I picked on the old Jarvee because Captain Thompson had often told me there was something queer about her. I used to ask him up here whenever he came ashore and try to get him to tell me more about it, you know. But the funny thing was, he could never tell me anything definite concerning her queerness. He seemed always to know, but when it came to putting his knowledge into words, it was as if he found that the reality melted out of it. He would end up usually by saying that you saw things, and then he would wave his hands vaguely, but further than that, he never seemed able to pass on the knowledge of something strange which he had noticed about the ship, except odd outside details. Can't keep men in her nohow, he often told me. They get frightened and they see things and they feel things. I've lost a power of men out of her, fallen from aloft, you know. She's getting a bad name. And then he'd shake his head very solemnly. KB, ship has black mould. Could be. And Alia, yes, I think you might have to be a little cautious about saying that name. And thank you for reminding me to re-enable chat. There you go. Old Thompson was a brick in every way. I said brick, guys. It means nice, strong, solid person. When I got aboard, I found that he'd given me the use of a whole empty cabin opening off my own as my laboratory and workshop. He gave the carpenter orders to fit up the empty cabin with shelves and other conveniences, according to my directions, and in a couple of days I had all the apparatus, both mechanical and electric, with which I conducted my other ghost hunts, neatly and safely stowed away. For I took a great deal of gear with me, as I intended to interest myself by examining thoroughly into the mystery about which the captain was at once so positive and so vague. During the first fortnight out, I followed my usual methods of making a thorough and exhaustive search. This I did with the most scrupulous care, but found nothing abnormal of any kind in the whole vessel. She was an old wooden ship, and I took care to sound and measure every casement and bulkhead, to examine every exit from the holds, and to seal all the hatches. These and many other precautions I took, but at the end of the fortnight I had neither seen anything nor found anything. The old bark was just, to all seeming, a healthy, average old-timer, jogging along comfortably from one port to another. And save for an indefinable sense of what I could now describe as abnormal peace about the ship, I could find nothing to justify the old captain's solemn and frequent assurances that I would see soon enough for myself. This he would say often as we walked the poop together, afterwards stopping to take a long, expectant, half-fearful look at the immensity of the sea around. Kate, buddy, a trip for your health means chilling and drinking rum, not whatever it is you're up to. Very much a working holiday. Then on the 18th day, something truly happened. I'd been pacing the poop as usual with old Thompson, when suddenly he stopped and looked up at the mizzen royal, which had just begun to flap against the mast. He glanced at the wind vane near him, then ruffled his hat back and stared at the sea. "Wind's dropping, mister. There'll be trouble tonight," he said. "You see yon?" And he pointed away to windward. "What?" I asked, staring with a curious little thrill that was due to more than curiosity. "Where?" "Right off the beam," he said, "coming from under the sun." "I don't see anything," I explained after a long stare at the wide-spreading silence of the sea that was already glassing into a dead calm surface now that the wind had died. "Yon shadow fixin'," said the old man, reaching for his glasses. He focused them and took a long look, then passed them across to me and pointed with his finger. "Just under the sun," he repeated, "coming towards us at a rate of knots." He was curiously calm and matter-of-fact, and yet I felt that a certain excitement had him in the throat, so that I took the glasses eagerly and stared according to his directions. After a minute I saw it, a vague shadow upon the still surface of the sea that seemed to move towards us as I stared. For a moment I gazed fascinated, yet ready every moment to swear that I saw nothing, and in the same instant to be assured that there was truly something out there upon the water, apparently coming towards the ship. "It's only a shadow, Captain," I said at length. "Just so, mister," he replied simply. "Have a look over to the stern, to the nor'ard." He spoke to the quietest way, as a man speaks who is sure of all his facts and who is facing an experience he's faced before, yet who salts his natural matter-of-factness with a deep and constant excitement. At the captain's hint, I turned about and directed the glasses to the northward. For a while I searched, sweeping my aided vision to and fro over the greying arc of the sea. And then I saw the thing plain in the field of the glass. A vague something, a shadow upon the water, and the shadow seemed to be moving towards the ship. "That's queer," I muttered, with a funny little stirring at the back of my throat. "Now to the westward, mister," said the captain, still speaking in his peculiar level way. I looked westward, and in a minute I picked up the thing, a third shadow that seemed to move across the sea as I watched it. "My God, Captain!" I exclaimed. "What does it mean?" "Well, that's just what I want to know, mister," said the captain. "I've seen them before and thought sometimes I must be going mad. Sometimes they're plain, and sometimes they're scarce to be seen, and sometimes they're like living things, and sometimes they're like naught at all but silly fancies. You wonder I couldn't name them to you proper now?" I did not answer, for I was staring now expectantly towards the south along the length of the bark. Afar off on the horizon, my glasses picked up something dark and vague upon the surface of the sea, a shadow it seemed, which grew plainer. "My God," I muttered again, "this is real, this—" I turned again to the eastward. "Coming in from the 4 points, ain't they?" said Captain Thompson, and he blew his whistle. "Take them 3 royals off her," he told the mate, "and tell one of the boys to shove lanterns up the sherpoles. Get the men down smart before dark," he concluded as the mate moved off to see the orders carried out. "I'm sending no men aloft tonight," he said to me. "I've lost enough that way." "They may be only shadows, Captain, after all," I said, still looking earnestly at that far-off vague greyness on the eastward sea. "Bit of mist or cloud floating low?" Yet though I said this, I had no belief that it was so. And as for old Captain Thompson, he never took the trouble to answer, but reached for his glasses, which I passed to him. "Getting thin and disappearing as they come near," he said presently. "I know, I've seen them do that often plenty before. They'll be close around the ship soon, but you nor me won't see them, nor no one else, but they'll be there. I wish 'twas morning I'd do that." He had handed his glasses back to me, and I'd been staring at each of the oncoming shadows in turn. It was as Captain Thompson had said. As they drew nearer, they seemed to spread and thin out, and presently to become dissipated into the grey of the gloaming, so that I could easily have imagined that I watched merely 4 little portions of grey cloud, expanding naturally into impalpableness and invisibility. "Wish I'd took them topgallants off her when I was about it," remarked the captain presently. "Can't think to send no one off the decks tonight, not unless there's real need." He slipped away from me and peered at the aneroid in the skylight. "Glass steady anyhow," he muttered as he came away, seeming more satisfied. By this time the men had all returned to the decks, and the night was down upon us, so I could watch the queer dissolving shadows which approached the ship. Yet as I walked the poop with old Captain Thompson, you can imagine how I grew to feel. Often I found myself looking over my shoulder with quick, jerky glances, for it seemed to me that in the curtains of gloom that hung just beyond the rails there must be a vague, incredible thing looking inboard. I questioned the captain in 1,000 ways, but could get little out of him beyond what I knew. It was as if he had no power to convey to another the knowledge which he possessed, and I could ask no one else, for every other man on the ship was newly signed on, including the mates, which was in itself a significant fact. What's he been doing to them? How are people doing? Hope you're enjoying this. You'll see for yourself, mister, was the refrain with which the captain parried my questions, so that it began to seem as if he almost feared to put anything he knew into words. Yet once, when I had jerked around with a nervous feeling that something was at my back, he said, calmly enough, "Naught to fear, mister, whilst you're in the light and on the decks." His attitude was extraordinary in the way in which he accepted the situation. He appeared to have no personal fear. The night passed quietly until about 11 o'clock, when suddenly and without one atom of warning, a furious squall burst on the vessel. There was something monstrous and abnormal in the wind. It was as if some power were using the elements to an infernal purpose. You have people in your chat? Screams and runs away. Thank you, fishy. Sucky git. Yet the captain met the situation calmly. The helm was put down and the sails shaken while the 3 topgallants were lowered. Then the 3 upper topsails. Yet still the breeze roared over us, almost drowning the thunder which the sails were making in the night. "Split 'em to ribbons," the captain yelled in my ear above the noise of the wind. "Can't help it. I'm sending no man aloft tonight unless she seems likely to shake the sticks out of her. That's what bothers me." For nearly an hour after that, until 8 bells went at midnight, the wind showed no signs of easing, but breezed up harder than ever. And all the while the skipper and I walked the poop, he ever and again peering up anxiously through the darkness at the banging and thrashing sails. For my part, I could do nothing except stare round and round at the extraordinarily dark night in which the ship seemed to be embedded solidly. The very feel and sound of the wind gave me a sort of constant horror, for there seemed to be an unnaturalness rampant in the atmosphere. But how much of this was the effect of my overstrung nerves and excited imagination, I cannot say. Certainly in all my experience, I had never come across anything just like what I felt and endured through that peculiar squall. At 8 bells, when the other watch came on deck, the captain was forced to send all hands aloft to make the canvas fast, as he had begun to fear that he would actually lose his masts if he delayed longer. This was done, and the bark snugged right down. Yet though the work was done successfully, the captain's fears were justified in a sufficiently horrible way, for as the men were beginning to make their way in off the wards, there was a loud crying and shouting aloft, and immediately afterwards a crash down on the main deck, followed instantly by a second crash. "My God, 2 of them!" shouted the skipper as he snatched a lamp from the forward binnacle. Then down onto the main deck. It was as he had said. 2 of the men had fallen, or, as the thought came to me, been thrown from aloft and were lying silent on the deck. Above us in the darkness I heard a few vague shouts followed by a curious quiet, save for the constant blast of the wind, whose whistling and howling in the rigging seemed to but accentuate the complete and frightened silence of the men aloft. Then I was aware that the men were coming down swiftly, and presently one after the other came down with a quick leap out of the rigging, and stood about the 2 fallen men, with odd exclamations and questions which always merged off instantly into new silence. And all the time I was conscious of a most extraordinary sense of oppression and frightened distress and fearful expectation, for it seemed to me, standing there near the dead in that unnatural wind, that a power of evil filled all the night around the ship, and that some fresh horror was imminent. The following morning there was a solemn little service, very rough and crude, but undertaken with a nice reverence, and the two men who had fallen were tilted off from a hatch cover and plunged suddenly out of sight. As I watched them vanish in the deep blue of the water, an idea came to me, and I spent part of the afternoon talking it over with the captain, after which I passed the rest of the time until sunset was upon us in arranging and fitting up a part of my electrical apparatus. Then I went on deck and had a good look around. The evening was beautifully calm, and ideal for the experiment which I had in mind, for the wind had died away with a peculiar suddenness after the death of the two men, and all that day the sea had been like glass. To a certain extent, I believed I comprehended the primary cause of the vague but peculiar manifestations which I had witnessed the previous evening, and which Captain Thompson believed implicitly to be intimately connected with the death of the two sailormen. I believed the origins of the happenings to lie in a strange but perfectly understandable cause, i.e. in that phenomenon known technically as attractive vibrations. Hodgson, in his monograph on induced hauntings, points out that such are invariably produced by induced vibrations, that it is by temporary vibrations set up by some outside cause. Isn't saltwater a conductor? He's going to electrocute himself. Oh, Kate B., you have no idea. This is somewhat abstruse to follow out in the story of this kind, but it was on a long consideration of these points that I had resolved to make experiments to see whether I could not produce a counter or repellent vibration, a thing which Hodgson had succeeded in producing on 3 occasions, and in which I have had a partial success once, failing only because of the imperfectness of the apparatus I had aboard. As I've said, I can scarcely follow the reasoning further in a brief record such as this. Neither do I think it would be of interest to you, who are interested only in the startling and weird side of my investigations. Oh dear, that's catty. Yet I have told you sufficient to show you the germ of my reasonings, and to enable you to follow intelligently my hopes and expectations in sending out what I hoped would be repellent vibrations. I can manage repellent vibrations, I send them out all the time. Therefore it was that, when the sun had descended to within 10 degrees of the visible horizon, the captain and I began to watch for the appearance of the shadows. Presently, under the sun, I discovered the same peculiar appearance of a moving greyness which I had seen on the preceding night, and almost immediately Captain Thompson told me that he saw the same to the south. To the north and east we perceived the same extraordinary thing, and I at once set my electric apparatus at work, sending out the strange repelling force to the dim, far shadows of mystery which moved steadily out of the distance towards the vessel. Earlier in the evening the captain had snugged the bark right down to her topsails, for as he said, until the calm went he would risk nothing. According to him, it was always calm weather that the extraordinary manifestations occurred. In this case he was certainly justified, for a most tremendous squall struck the ship in the middle watch, taking the fore upper topsail right out of the ropes. At the time when it came I was lying down on a locker in the saloon, but I ran up onto the poop as this vessel canted under the enormous force of the wind. Here I found the air pressure tremendous and the noise of the squall stunning, and over it all and through it all I was conscious of something abnormal and threatening that set my nerves uncomfortably acute. The thing was not natural. Yet, despite the carrying away of the topsail, not a man was sent aloft. "Let 'em all go," said old Captain Thompson. "I'd have shortened her down to the bare sticks if I'd done all I wanted." About 2 a.m. the squall passed with astonishing suddenness, and the night showed clear above the vessel. From then onward I paced the poop with the skipper, often pausing at the break to look along the lighted main deck. It was on one of those occasions that I saw something peculiar. It was like a vague flitting of an impossible shadow between me and the whiteness of the well-scrubbed decks. Yet even as I stared, the thing was gone, and I could not say with surety that I had seen anything. "Pretty plain to see, mister," said the captain's voice at my elbow. "I've only seen that once before, and we lost half the hands that trip. We'd better be at home, I'm thinking. It'll end in scrapping ashore. The old man's calmness bewildered me, almost as much as the confirmation his remark gave that I really had seen something abnormal floating between me and the deck 8 feet below us. "Good Lord, Captain Thompson," I exclaimed. "This is simply infernal." "Just that," he agreed. "I said, mister, you'd see if you'd wait, and this ain't the half. You wait till you sees 'em looking like little black clouds all over the sea around the ship, and moving steady with the ship. All the same, I ain't seen them aboard but the once. Guess we're in for it." "How do you mean?" I asked, but though I questioned him in every way, I could get nothing satisfactory out of him. "You'll see, mister. You wait and see. She's a queer 'un." And that was about the extent of his further efforts and the methods of enlightening me. From then on, through the rest of the watch, I leaned over the break of the poop, staring down at the main deck and odd whiles taking quick glances to the rear. The skipper had resumed his steady pacing of the poop, but now and then he would come to a pause beside me and ask calmly enough whether I'd seen any more of them there. Several times I saw the vagueness of something drifting in the lights of lanterns, and a sort of waving in the air at this place and that, as if it might be an attenuated something having movement that was half seen for a moment and then gone before my brain could record anything definite. Toward the end of the watch, however, both the captain and I saw something very extraordinary. He had just come beside me and was leaning over the rail across the break. "Another one of them there," he remarked in his calm way, giving me a gentle nudge and nodding his head toward the port side of the main deck, a yard or two to our left. In the place he had indicated there was a faint, dull, shadowy spot, seeming suspended about a foot above the deck. This grew more visible, and there was movement in it, and a constant, oily-seeming whirling from the centre outwards. The thing expanded to several feet across, with the lighted planks of the deck showing vaguely through. The movement from the centre outwards was now becoming very distinct, till the whole strange shape blackened and grew more dense, so that the deck below was hidden. Then, as I stared with the most intense interest, there went a thinning movement over the thing, and almost directly. It had dissolved, so that there was nothing more to be seen than the vague rounded shape of shadow, hovering and convoluting dimly between us and the deck below. This gradually thinned out and vanished, and we were both of us left staring down at a piece of deck where the planking and pitch seams showed plain and distinct in the light from the lamps that were now hung nightly on the sherpoles. "Mighty queer that, mister," said the captain meditatively, as he fumbled for his pipe. "Mighty queer." Then he lit his pipe and began again his pacing of the poop. The calm lasted for a week, with the sea like glass, and every night without warning there was a repetition of the extraordinary squall, so that the captain had everything made fast at dusk and waited patiently for a trade wind. Each evening I experimented further with my attempts to set up a repellent vibrations, but without result. I'm not sure whether I ought to say that my meddling produced no result, for the calm gradually assumed a more unnatural, permanent aspect, whilst the sea looked more than ever like a plain of glass, bulged anon with the low, oily roil of some deep swell. For the rest, there was by day a silence so profound as to give a sense of unrealness, and never a seabird hove in sight, while the movement of the vessel was so slight as scarce to keep up the constant creak of spars and gear, which is the ordinary accompaniment of a calm. Kate B, if it's not working, maybe it's aimed about vibrations. Well, it could be. The sea appeared to have become an emblem of desolation and freeness, so that it seemed to me at last that there was no more than any known world, but just one great ocean going on forever into the far distances in every direction. At night the strange squalls assumed a far greater violence, so that sometimes it seemed as if the very spars would be ripped and twisted out of the vessel. Yet fortunately no harm came in that wise. Find out if any of the crew killed an albatross. Yeah, I've had Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner playing in my head for the last 5 minutes. Edie's not mucking around. As the days passed, I became convinced that at last that my experiments were producing very distinct results, though the opposite to those which I hoped to produce. For now at sunset, a sort of grey cloud resembling light smoke would appear far away in every quarter almost immediately upon the commencement of the vibrations, with the effect that I desisted from any prolonged attempt and became more tentative in my experiments. At last, however, when we'd endured this condition of affairs for a week, I had a long talk with old Captain Thompson, and he agreed to let me carry out a bold experiment to its conclusion. It was to keep the vibrations going steadily at full power from a little before sunset until the dawn, and to take careful notes of the results. With this in view, all was made ready. The royal and topgallant yards were sent down, all the sails stowed, and everything about the decks made fast. A sea anchor was rigged out over the bows, and a long line of cable veered away. This was to ensure the vessel coming head to wind should any one of those strange squalls strike us from any quarter during the night. Oh, this can only go well, can't it? I cannot imagine this going badly at all. It's all fine. What do you guys think? So give me a moment to have a drink. Later in the afternoon, the men were sent into the forecastle and told that they might please themselves and turn in or do anything they liked, but that they were not to come on deck during the night, whatever happened. To ensure this, the port and starboard doors were padlocked. Yikes! He's locking them in, and basically he's locking the fire escapes. This is not necessarily a good idea. Your money's still on someone killing a seabird. Could be. Afterwards, I made the 1st and the 8th sign of the Samar ritual opposite each doorpost, connecting them with triple lines crossed at every 7th inch. You've dipped deeper into the science of magic than I have, Arkwright, and you'll know what that means. Okay, I want a side story with Arkwright. What the hell has he been into that Carnacki is referring to him as an expert in magic? I have questions. I don't trust Arkwright. Maybe that's just me. Following this, I ran a wire entirely around the outside of the forecastle and connected it up with my machinery, which I'd erected in the sail locker aft. In any case, I explained to the captain, they run practically no risk other than the general risk which we may expect in the form of a terrific storm burst. The real danger will be to those who are meddling. The path of the vibrations will make a kind of halo around the apparatus. I shall have to be there to control, and I'm willing to risk it, but you'd better get into your cabin and the 3 mates must do the same. No, Carnacki's just saying it's magic, so I don't have to explain anything. Yeah, this is true. He's basically farming the questions off so that people have to ask Arkwright later for details, rather than bugging him. This the old captain refused to do, and the 3 mates begged to be allowed to stay and see the fun. I warned them very seriously that there might be a disagreeable and unavoidable danger, but they agreed to risk it, and I can tell you I was not sorry to have their companionship. I set to work then, making them help where I needed help, and so presently I had all my gear in order. Then I led my wires up through the skylight from the cabin and set the vibrator dial in trembler box level, screwing them solidly down to the poop deck in the clear space that lay between the foreside of the skylight and the lid of the sail locker. I got the 3 mates and the captain to take their places close together, and I warned them not to move whatever happened. I set to work then, alone, and chalked a temporary pentacle about the whole of us, including the apparatus. Afterwards, I made haste to get the tubes of my electric pentacle fitted all about us, for it was getting on to dusk. As soon as this was done, I switched on the current into the vacuum tubes, and immediately the pale, sickly glare shone dull all about us, seeming cold and unreal in the last light of the evening. Immediately afterwards, I set the vibrations beating out into all space, and then I took my seat beside the control board. Here I had a few words with the others, warning them again, whatever they might hear or see, not to leave the pentacle if they valued their lives. They nodded to this, and I knew that they were fully impressed with the possibility of the unknown danger we were meddling with. Okay, having thought that this was going to be a solid two-parter, I'm thinking this could just be probably another 20 minutes. If people are okay with that, I can break it down in the playlist. Then we settled down to watch. Oh, okay. Yep. Yeah, I think that's fine. I'm melting anyway. Then we settled down to watch. We were all in our oilskins, for I expected the experiment to include some very peculiar behaviour on the part of the elements, and so we were ready to face the night. One other thing I was careful to do, and that was to confiscate all matches so that no one should forgetfully light his pipe. The light rays are paths to certain of the forces. With a pair of marine glasses, I was staring round at the horizon. All around, but miles away in the greying of the evening, there seemed to be a strange, vague darkening of the surface of the sea. This became more distinct, and it seemed to me presently that it might be a slight, low-lying mist far about the ship. I watched it very intently, and the captain and the three mates were doing likewise through their glasses. Coming in on us at a rate of knots, mister," said the old man in a low voice. "This is what I call playing with hell. I only hope it'll all come right." That was all he said, and afterwards there was absolute silence from him and the others through the strange hours that followed. As the night stole down upon the sea, we lost sight of the peculiar incoming circle of mist, and there was a period of the most intense and oppressive silence to the five of us, sitting there watchful and quiet within the pale glow of the electric pentacle. A while later, there came a sort of strange, noiseless lightning. By noiseless, I mean that while the hashes appeared to be near at hand and lit up all the vague sea around, yet there was no thunder. Neither, so it appeared to me, did there seem to be any reality in the flashes. This is a queer thing to say, but it describes my impressions. It was as if I saw a representation of lightning, rather than the physical electricity itself. No, of course, I'm not pretending to use the word in its technical sense. Abruptly, a strange quivering went through the vessel from end to end and died away. I looked fore and aft, and then glanced at the four men, who stared back at me with a sort of dumb and half-frightened wonder, but no one said anything. About 5 minutes passed, with no sound anywhere except the faint buzz of the apparatus, and nothing visible except the noiseless lightning which came down, flash after flash, lighting the sea all around the vessel. Then a most extraordinary thing happened. Like that didn't count. The peculiar quivering passed again through the ship and died away. It was followed immediately by a kind of undulation of the vessel, first fore and aft, and then from side to side. I can give you no better illustration of the strangeness of the movement on that glass-like sea than to say it was just such a movement as might have been given her had an invisible giant hand lifted her and toyed with her, canting her this way and that with a certain curious and rather sickening rhythm of movement. This appeared to last about 2 minutes, so far as I can guess, and ended with the ship being shaken up and down several times, after which there came again the quivering and then quietness. A full hour must have passed, during which I observed nothing except that twice the vessel was faintly shaken, and the second time this was followed by a slight repetition of the curious undulations. This, however, lasted but a few seconds, and afterwards there was only the abnormal and oppressive silence of the night, punctured time after time by these noiseless flashes of lightning. All the time, I did my best to study the appearance of the sea and the atmosphere around the ship. One thing was apparent, that the surrounding wall of vagueness had drawn in more upon the ship, so that the brightest flashes now showed me no more than a clear quarter of a mile of ocean around us, after which the sight was just lost in trying to penetrate a kind of shadowy distance that yet had no depth in it, but which still lacked any power to arrest the vision at any particular point, so that one could not know definitely whether there was anything there or not, but only that one's sight was limited by some phenomena which hid all the distant sea. Do I make this clear? The strange noiseless lightning increased in vividness, and the flashes began to come more frequently. This went on till they were almost continuous, so that all the near sea could be watched with scarce an intermission. Yet the brightness of the flashes seemed to have no power to dull the pale light of the curious detached glows that circled in silent multitudes about us. About this time, I became aware of a strange sense of breathlessness. Each breath seemed to be drawn with difficulty, and presently with a sense of positive distress. The three mates and the captain were breathing with curious little gasps, and the faint buzz of the vibrator seemed to come from a great distance away. Easy, Chiger. For the rest, there was such a silence as made itself known like a dull, numbing ache upon the brain. The minutes passed slowly, and then abruptly I saw something new. There were grey things floating in the air about the ship, which were so vague and attenuated that at first I could not be sure that I saw anything, but in a while there could be no doubt that they were there. They began to show plainer in the constant glare of the quiet lightning, and growing darker and darker they increased visibly in size. They appeared to be but a few feet above the level of the sea, and they began to assume humped shapes. For quite half an hour, which seemed indefinitely longer, I watched those strange little humps, like little hills of blackness floating just above the surface of the water, moving round and round the vessel with a slow, everlasting circling that produced on my eyes the feeling that it was all a dream. It was later still that I discovered still another thing. Each of those great vague mounds had begun to oscillate as it circled around us. I was conscious at the same time that there was communicated to the vessel the beginning of a similar oscillating movement, so very slight at first that I could scarcely be sure she had so much as moved. The movement of the ship grew with a steady oscillation, the bows lifting first and then the stern, as if she were pivoted amidships. This ceased, and she settled down onto a level keel with a series of queer jerks, as if her weight was slowly being lowered again into the buoying of the water. Suddenly there came a cessation of the extraordinary lightning, and we were in absolute blackness with only the pale sickly glow of the electric pentacle above us, and the faint buzz of the apparatus seeming far away in the night. Can you picture it all? The five of us there, tense and watchful and wondering what was going to happen. The thing began gently. A little jerk upward of the starboard side of the vessel, then a second jerk, then a third, and the whole ship was canted distinctly to port. It continued in a kind of slow, rhythmic tilting with curious timed pauses between the jerks, and suddenly, I saw that we were in absolute danger, for the vessel was being capsized by some enormous force in the utter silence and blackness of that night. "My God, mister, stop it!" came the captain's voice, quick and very hoarse. "She'll be gone in a minute, she'll be gone!" He'd got onto his knees and was staring around and gripping at the deck. The three mates were also gripping at the deck with their palms to stop them sliding down the violent slope. In that moment came a final tilting of the side of the vessel, and the deck rose up almost like a wall. I snatched at the lever of the vibrator and switched it over. Instantly, the angle of the deck decreased as the vessel righted several feet with a jerk. The righting movement continued with little rhythmic jerks until the ship was once more on an even keel. And even as she righted, I was aware of an alteration in the tenseness of the atmosphere, and a great noise far off to starboard. It was the roaring of wind. A huge flash of lightning was followed by others, and the thunder crashed continually overhead. The noise of the wind to starboard rose to a loud screaming, and drove towards us through the night. Then the lightning ceased, and the deep roll of the thunder was lost in the nearer sound of the wind, which was now within a mile of us, and making a most hideous bellowing scream. The shrill howling came at us out of the dark, and covered every other sound. It was as if all the night on that side were a vast cliff, sending down high and monstrous echoes upon us. This is a queer thing to say, I know, but it may help you to get the feeling of the thing. For that just describes exactly how it felt to me at the time. That queer, echoing, empty sense above us in the night. Yet all the emptiness filled with sound on high. Do you get it? It was most extraordinary, and there was a grand something about it all, as if one had suddenly come upon the steps of some monstrous lost world. Then the wind rushed out at us and stunned us with its force and sound and fury. We were smothered and half stunned. The vessel went over on her port side, merely from pressure of the wind on her naked spars and side. The whole night seemed one yell, and the foam roared and snowed over us in countless tons. I've never known anything like it. We were all splayed about the poop, holding on to anything we could, while the pentacle was smashed to atoms so that we were in complete darkness. The storm burst to come down on us. Towards morning, the storm calmed, and by evening we were running before a fine breeze. Yet the pumps had to be kept going steadily, for we had sprung a pretty bad leak, which proved so serious that we had to take to the boats 2 days later. However, as we were picked up that night, so that we only had a short time of it. As for the Jarvee, she is now safely at the bottom of the Atlantic, where she had better remain forever. Carnacki came to an end and tapped out his pipe. "But you haven't explained," I remonstrated. "What made her like that? What made her different from other ships? Why did those shadows and things come to her? What's your idea?" "Well," replied Carnacki, "in my opinion, she was a focus. That is a technical term which I can best explain by saying she possessed the attractive vibration, that is, the power to draw to her any psychic waves in the vicinity, very much in the way of a medium." Yeah, Kate B, you didn't unhaunt the boat, you just sank it. That's not helping. Exactly. Absolutely. The way in which the vibration is acquired, to use a technical term again, is of course purely a matter for supposition. She may have developed it during the years, owing to a sustained suitability of conditions. Or it may have been in her, or of her is a better term, from the very day her keel was laid. My God, it's Christine. I mean, the direction in which she lay, the condition of the atmosphere, the state of the electric tensions, the very blows of the hammers and accidental combining of materials suited to such an end, all might tend to such a thing. And this is only to speak of the unknown. The vast unknown, it is vain to speculate about in a brief chatter like this. I would like to remind you here of that idea of mine that certain forms of so-called hauntings may have their cause in the attractive vibrations. A building or a ship, just as I've indicated, may develop vibrations, even as certain materials in combination under the proper conditions will certainly develop an electric current. I think you're leaping to conclusions there, sir. To say more in a talk of this scope is useless. I'm more inclined to remind you of the glass which will vibrate to a certain note struck upon the piano, and to silence all your worrying questions with that simple little unanswered one. What is electricity? When we've got that clear, it will be time to take the next step in a more dogmatic fashion. We are but speculating on the coasts of a strange country of mystery. In this case, I think the next best step for you all will be home and bed. And with this terse ending, in the most genial way possible, Carnacki ushered us out presently onto the quiet chill of the embankment, replying heartily to our various good nights. Kate B. The Eastland, a passenger ship that capsized in Chicago Harbor and drowned almost 1,000 people. Tippy from the start. Post-Titanic, the added lifeboats made her more top-heavy. Yeah, could just be bad design. I'm now reminded of the Herald of Free Enterprise, which was a roll-on, roll-off car ferry, sank on the, I think it was it was either Ramsgate Zeebrugge or Dover Zeebrugge rum. That put out with the car deck lowered. So it tipped. It filled with water and it tipped. That was hideous. So yeah, it could be bad design, it could be some form of curse, it could be almost anything. So, I thought you guys might appreciate that. I hope you did. So that's now 3 Carnackis I have done. Okay. Yeah, please can I have book? Thank you. So, I will end book club there and let you guys think of how you might unhaunt a boat without sinking it. Thank you for the impeccable reading comment. I appreciate that wildly. I hope my readings are improving. And I apologise slightly for the fact that clearly Captain Thompson is from Cornwall. But that's how it is actually written in dialect. It's not wildly, but it is definitely, that's where he's going with it. So, thank you very much. Yeah, the heat's making concentration interesting. There are a couple more Carnackis that I would really like to do. And I don't know whether I should go and do something else and then come back to them, or whether I make this a little season. So I will let you guys decide. Oh, that's interesting. This is supposed to be the complete works of William Hope Hodgson, and there is one of the Carnacki stories which is not there. It's not a problem, I think I have it elsewhere. Huh, interesting. So we have The House Among the Laurels, which is odd. The Whistling Room I'm not a massive fan of. And I think it also requires me to use Nordic pronunciation, and I'm not doing that. However, yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, I have the Kobo complete works, and I've got Carnacki the Ghost Finder and Dead Tree. So I'm wondering about The Horse of the Invisible, in which a family curse impacts a bride-to-be, that she be haunted by a spectral horse until either she ends herself or is married. And The Searcher of the End House, which is basically Carnacki before Chain Walk, when he was living in a little cottage with his mum. Very strange story. Fun, but weird. So, if there's Nordic to be pronounced, you'd be happy to teach me. Actually, Arlie, at some point I might have to throw a couple of words in your direction and ask for audio of it. So I would like to do The Horse of the Invisible and The Searcher of the End House, in whichever order people would prefer. Ghostly horses or near cosmic horror, in a ghost story kind of way. And then possibly end with The Hog, which I think would be a couple of weeks on its own, which is solid cosmic horror because it features in, I think, the second Call of Cthulhu Bestiary add-on. It's used as part of the mythos, or it's hinted at as being part of the mythos, and certainly it fits. But that is also the one where they have to wear Indian rubber costumes in order to insulate themselves. And all I'm thinking is you could never really adapt it without some serious amendments to the outfitting. I just keep imagining both the smell and the squeaking. You do love some cosmic horror. Okay, in that case, next week I will do The Searcher of the End House. The week after that, The Horse of the Invisible. And then we'll wrap up this series of Carnacki with The Hog. I think that sounds quite plan-worthy. I reckon The Horse of the Invisible might be 2 weeks. Searcher of the End House, I always think of it as being longer than it is. Searcher of the End House might be one solid session. But I will actually count pages and see how that works out. And take it from there. Right. There may be a stream in 20 minutes or so of a game. I need to have a chat about possible multiplayer and check temperatures to see if my computer's going to explode. In the meantime, thank you very much for supporting me. Thank you very much for saying nice things. I very much appreciate that. And if you happen to be watching this on VOD or on YouTube, then if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via subscribing to my YouTube, following me on Twitch, and if you'd like to actually contribute, ko-fi.com/Druttercup helps me pay the bills. And in this case, paying the bills includes having a fan running pretty much constantly because, my God, it is hot. Looking forward to listening to more readings next week. Don't die. I will endeavour not to die. Right,